welcome to the third Pro GBM of this quarter. I know Kenro told me last week that he couldn't make it, so I mean, if any of you guys are wondering, but you can still message him about theory or not theory, like music production questions. I mean, I'm sure he knows theory as well, so if you want to ask him theory questions, that'd be cool too. So this week, I forget who suggested it, but last week someone said like, oh, could we go over basslines, like tips and tricks for writing basslines? And I thought that was a really good idea because like I personally didn't know that much about writing basslines. And I definitely learned a lot in kind of listening to a bunch of sources. So hopefully this helps you. Kind of a general overview of what I did is I basically just wrote some piano chords. I'll go over the chords. And then I started off with just the root notes for each of the chords. And the root notes themselves don't really move a lot, and so it's kind of boring. And so it's a good example in that sense. Because if it's not moving a lot and you're kind of just playing like more or less the same note, then you're like, okay, well, I want to make my bass, better, or kind of have more movement or sort of complement my sound a bit more. But how do I do that? Like, what do I do? Do I just like throw in random notes? And that's pretty much what I did for like the longest time. But there's definitely some kind of not really do's and don'ts so much as this will be more helpful than that. And there's actually a really good YouTube video on this. It's kind of one of those like cheesy ones where it's like 6 hacks for like how to get better X. Like very clickbaity title, and I fell for it. But they were actually fairly good tips, and I used most of them. I wouldn't stick to all of them like religiously, but that's like anything in music, right? You don't want to just keep it like a steadfast rule. You want to apply it to whatever you need. So, oh shit, I never really thought through the whole push to talk mechanics of it, because now I have to like hold this button. Oh, no. Okay, so I'm gonna stop talking now, and I'll just kind of pull up the chords, and then I don't know, I'll figure this out. Okay, so this is the chord progression I used. I just stuck with C, good old C major, or a tried and true chord progression. But you can tell that there's some accidentals in here, like this is D sharp and G sharp, and that's just because I used a flattened 6th chord and a flattened 7th chord, kind of just to accentuate this idea of the root note not really moving, and also just because the regular 1/6. Or actually, no, it was like, so it was, originally I did a 1, 2, 6, 7, meaning, starting on C major, going to D minor, then going to A minor, then going to B diminished. But that sounds kind of boring and lame, in my opinion. So I decided to just mix it up. So here's what the chord progression sounds like. Then I basically just added some harmony. So yeah, pretty straightforward, nothing really that complicated about the chords. And honestly, the chords are still kind of boring, but that kind of works to our benefit in this case, because it allows us to kind of focus more on the bass line and decide, okay, is this bass line really interesting, or did I just like make up some stupid shit? And what I did also was I chose 3 different types of basses, because the same techniques might not apply for every single bass. And that's kind of the problem that I found with like a lot of the tutorials and whatnot that I saw, was that they just kind of assumed, oh, okay, you have a bass player, right? And so, they're playing the bass guitar or whatever. And so they're just going to be playing the same type of notes. But, a bass guitar is very different from like a sub bass that you would put in like an EDM track, for a variety of reasons. I mean, a bass guitar will always have those kind of metally harmonic characteristics and that kind of transient dip in the beginning that'll just provide you with a lot more possibilities than a sub bass with kind of its characteristics. So like if you vary a sub bass too much, or if it kind of changes too quickly, you're going to get a lot of pops and clicks and things like that. So you can't do like slap bass with a sub bass in EDM. It just doesn't really work the same way. I mean, you can put an envelope in it, and 808s kind of let you get around that to some extent, but it's just not quite the same thing. So I'll play each of the three. So I did a sub bass, I did a respace, which is kind of like a sub, but it's kind of like warbly. It has like a bit of chorus on the high end and whatnot. So it's kind of like spooky and cool, in my opinion. And then I did sort of like a pluck bass. It's like a doop 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 doop. Unfortunately, I didn't do like any Kenro like crazy basses because those have like a lot of pitch bends and formant shifting and whatnot, and that kind of ruins the whole point of like the melodicness of, or not ruins the point, but it kind of makes it hard to identify like, okay, well, am I making a melodic bass? And also I'm not like Cohen sound or anything, so I'm not like god tier when it comes to making bass lines. So let me play each of them with the piano, and then I'll kind of talk about what I did in like what I did to change it. Like it doesn't sound bad, right? Especially the last two chords actually sound like pretty good to me, especially with the bass, kind of gives it that like resounding sort of sound. But it's also like not particularly anything exciting, right? Like unless you were just doing, 4-chord loop, just loud and ambient with a bunch of reverb and side chaining, then it would probably just sound pretty boring. Like if you just had this in a chorus or a verse or anything. So let me play the second one, which is the respace. So the respace sounds like. Or sorry, the last one is like a stabby bass. Sorry if I repeat myself, because I like just keep forgetting to press the hotkey. The last one's kind of like a plucky bass. So yeah, in my opinion, the plucky bass sounds the best, and it's like the one you could do the most with because you have that kind of you can add a lot of syncopation in it, which is like kind of like one of the things that you can do to make your bass lines sort of stand out. So let me start with the sub. The Reese was kind of the hardest. I actually don't think the edited version really sounds that much better. So yeah, I guess take it as you will. So let's go to the sub because that's where I kind of did most of the kind of tips and tricks. Kind of so I rediscovered this feature after like a long time, but Ableton finally has a multi-clip editing, which all it means is that if you have multiple channels and you're trying to, so like, I mean, in some cases you could just kind of copy paste the root, right? Like highlight each of the bottom notes, copy paste, whatever. But if you're trying to do more intricate stuff where you're like, oh, okay, well, I want to make sure that I hit the, I want only the notes in whatever chords that I'm playing. And, let's say you don't remember like exactly what chords you're playing. So there'll be like these two lines. So the blue is the, and then the yellow would be the bass. So this is like a really good way to write bass lines as well, if you guys are curious. I think a lot of other DAWs have this. I know for a fact Ableton has this, or FL Studio has this, because they have ghost notes, which is pretty much the same thing. But I don't know if you could switch back and forth between them that easily. But what a lot of people do is they just write in one pattern and then sort of cycle through all their instruments so that they can kind of easily access each one. Yeah. But in this way, it's color coded, so it's perhaps like maybe a one level better. But it gets really cumbersome after like 3 because these lines are like very thin, so it's easy to kind of click on the wrong one. Anyway, I digress. So yeah, I'll just explain a few of the tenets that I kind of learned from a bunch of theory, videos on bass lines. One of the tenets is try to avoid perfect fourths and perfect fifths, and the reason is because like they harmonize, I guess, a bit too similarly. But what I found was that in a lot of sustained notes, like those kind of movements actually did work pretty well. So if you have just kind of a long sustained note, then it actually kind of functions well because it stays, because you can have a lot of like warbling and I'm trying to think of the word. Like you can have a lot of phasing, and that's kind of one of the qualities of a Reese, that it's like woo 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 woo, and then if you hit it like a higher note, it's like woo 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 woo, and that's kind of one of the qualities that makes it what it is. And so in some ways it kind of mitigates that effect over the kind of more melodic compositional effect, which actually kind of works to your benefit. But if you're talking about like an 808 or something a little more transient, then you generally want to avoid perfect fourths and fifths. Again, it's not like a hard and fast rule. So perfect fourths in this case would be if I go from A to what would that be? A to E, so D. So A to D would be a perfect fourth. A to E would be a perfect fifth in this case. So okay, that kind of eliminates two notes that I can go to. So let me go to C. That's kind of what was like more or less my logic. And I think C was actually it wasn't the note. So yeah. Actually, let me play it first, and then I can discuss it, because I realize it's kind of rambly. So yeah, kind of gives you an idea. Like, obviously a lot more movement, a lot more notes. But it's like, how do you pick those notes? Like, what do you do? So yeah, one really easy trick, and one that's used in a lot of like kind of future-y trap beats, things like that, is the 808 an octave higher. So or just kind of like the syncopated octave higher jump and then back down. So that's the kind of jumping up and then going back down. And then, but if I extend, actually, that doesn't sound like as bad as I thought. All right, so yeah, I take that back. But yeah, actually, so I guess the short note kind of adds another point to it. Well, I guess this does too. But so syncopation is another thing. So on top of making it an octave higher, if you're kind of anywhere off the beat, so this is this would be falling on a downbeat eighth note. Here would be the downbeat eighth note, and then keeps alternating that pattern 4 times. So 8 eighth notes in one measure. So I go A to an octave up, and then back down to C. So that doesn't violate any fifth. So that's not a perfect fifth or fourth. If I went G to C, that would be a fifth. So that would be a no-go. If I went F to C, that would be a no-go. So okay, cool, we avoided those notes. Then I kind of do something interesting, I guess, is like because I technically like wrote out of the key of C, I just kind of used the B, so the 7th degree of the scale, so B, right? So B goes back up to C. So usually, I mean, using B in a scale is kind of hard because it's just very tensiony. It wants to resolve up all the time. But kind of using this as like a passing note almost, or passing bass line, kind of walks your bass line down like do do do. Additionally, you could also like syncopate it. So if I this would be kind of going to the downbeat eighth note again. So that's that. So I kind of just walked it down, just using half steps. The sort of the quicker the interval is, like the more notes out of key you can kind of get away with, and you can kind of hear this like if you hear like any jazz like saxophonist from like playing bebop or whatever, right? They kind of just go up and down these like chromatic scales like left and right. And the speed kind of like tricks your mind into thinking like, oh, okay, we're eventually going to get there, right? Or it's sort of like it's too quick of a jump for your mind to be like, whoa, okay, it's like something's kind of off here. So yeah, the quicker the interval, the more you can get away with. But again, the quicker you make your bass notes, the kind of more pops and clicks you have to worry about. So it's kind of a balance of what do you want to do melodically versus what can you get away with production-wise, or kind of what can you fix production-wise. Of course, if you're like Thundercat or something, and you're just like shredding on the bass guitar, like this is not really a problem. That's like not really a limitation. This is more like a limitation of the medium in a way. So yeah, then I just go back to A sharp, so which is the root of the third chord, and then down to G, so that would be what is that? It's like a minor second. So 3 semitones, so 1, 2, 3. Back up to A sharp, down again, and then an octave up, just to give it that kind of movement again. So there's one thing that I didn't really cover here. Shoot, what is it? Oh yeah, actually, so other than the C, I tried to avoid the root note kind of as much as possible. of course you can use the root note, and starting at the root is kind of a good idea, especially if your last note is kind of dissonant. Like let's say this is B and that kind of resolves up to C or something. That could work pretty well. But generally, avoiding your root will kind of give it more movement, like give it more tension, and because that's really kind of like the power of a bass line is to, no matter what chord you have, like the bass can have a lot of say in terms of how it feels. So just by harmonizing the bass with the third of a chord versus the root note of a chord can make a really big difference, like perceptually. Maybe not like acoustically, but perceptually it can make a really big difference. So yeah, that's kind of all I want to say for that. Are there any questions so far?
You tried on this that didn't work? Was there stuff that like the video recommended but you thought did not work in virtue of it being a sub bass or something?
Yeah, kind of. So one other thing is like making motifs. So a motif is just a really fancy word for like just a small pattern within a pattern, right? So if your melody is one pattern that is repeating, a motif or a phrase or a lick, these are all like more or less synonymous. I mean, some people might have different connotations for a phrase versus a lick. So like a lick would be maybe on a guitar or something like, oh, that lick was really cool. But yeah, essentially they're like small musical ideas. So for example, I could, so I'm doing this kind of ascending, descending pattern where I don't return to the same note. I could have, tried to do the same thing, but maybe started a different note. So, maybe this is like A sharp, A, C, but then, I decide, okay, maybe I want to try G, I don't know, going up to, whatever, F or something, and then back down. So kind of repeating the pattern. And I have an example of that with like the more stabby bass lines, which will kind of make the idea more apparent. Actually, I'll just skip to that since I'm already on it. So this is almost like exclusively just the idea of the motif and then kind of going an octave up. So yeah, so it's what I essentially try to do is just do the same pattern over and over for each measure, but sort of changing it up slightly. So I'll kind of loop it through a couple times and then talk about what I did.
I really like that one. It's better than I like it more than the sub bass.
Yeah, no, honestly, yeah, this one is also my favorite. I'm not a huge fan of this right here, but yeah, I mean, it is what it is. I could still change it, or you guys can change it if you want. So yeah, so this started out. So if you guys don't remember, the original pattern was C going down to A, going up to A sharp, and then just kind of staying there for the last two measures. So I more or less kept that structure. So I basically, what I originally had was just eighth note C1, right, going all the way, and then drop down eighth note A0, and then up to A sharp, and then just kind of stays there. And then I started out just by kind of moving this C an octave up. So, and then it kind of started out with that. Originally I had these blank. If you do this, you're golden. I especially like just this kind of going an octave down. Just because the bass also has this kind of like very rumbly, like, it almost kind of reminds me of like tech house a bit. But yeah, so I kind of used the same technique earlier as well. So with these A's, so I kind of did like the walking down thing again, right? And this is almost like similar to the passing chords where, right, you're trying to get from chord A to chord B, and you're like, okay, well, what's in between? Well, there's this thing a half step up. So, okay, well, yeah, let's just use that and kind of roll with it. And I did the same thing going up. This could be more interesting, right? Like, I could, or, I could even vary it up more. Wait, that is a fourth right there, so I'm not going to use that. So yeah, kind of another way to do things. I like the E a little bit better, but again, it's like personal preference. Um, yeah, and I think I did for the most part. I avoided fourths and fifths. Oh, although I think this is actually a fifth right here. So that's what
Yeah, I was
E
gonna ask,
flat.
it sounded really, really seamless,
Dun,
but
yeah.
to be honest, I liked that, and I was gonna ask why that was so, and that might be because of it being a fifth.
Yeah. I think it's fifth. So it's going from what is that? E flat to G flat. Well, actually no, E flat to E flat to B flat, which is yeah, that is actually fifth. Yeah, I don't know. Again, yeah, I guess this is actually a good example of
Yeah, you broke your own advice, but it still worked anyway.
yeah, exactly.
I thought that the last measure sounded the best. To be honest, I like that one.
Yeah, so yeah, I mean, I guess that goes to show you like how much I know. So, but yeah, so that's the another example, and then I'm gonna go over the kind of what I thought was the hardest example, just kind of because of the nature of the bass. I'll go over the Reese. I'm actually kind of curious. I'm not actually gonna try to use what I use for the sub, but just kind of replace it for the Reese. So yeah, this is I guess one of the biggest problems with like electronic music and writing bass lines is making sure you also pick a key such that whatever you write will actually be heard in the sub frequencies. Like, I mean, it sounds like a really stupid issue, but like it actually is one of the, I guess a really really big issue, and it's kind of why a lot of if you listen to like a lot of electronic dance music, they center around actually only like a few particular keys, or at least like kind of mainstream stuff. There's definitely other examples, like so I think it's usually F sharp minor is like a pretty popular key to write in, and then also it's relative major. Yeah, so A major, the kind of corresponding relative major.
A lot of times as well when you're working with like weird, I guess keys as well that doesn't have a lot of good basses. What a lot of electronic producers do is they don't actually start the entire track with whatever key that they're working on. So instead of working with your one, you start with like your two maybe or something like that, and then the bass line follows your two or not three, but like your two or your five or whatever of your actual key, and then your bass lines usually have a better melody that way, even though you're actually still following the key. You're not consistently saying that your first note of every single bar is like your key or something.
Yeah. Oh yeah. Just to reiterate what he said, in case I didn't pick up. You could use a key that you could use a different key than what your chorus is in order to start a song, or just for the chorus, or just for a particular part of the song, just so your bass notes sound a lot better. So I guess an easy way to do this maybe would be like if you're writing in G major or F sharp minor, then you just go fifth up, so D major, and then its corresponding minor, which would be D flat minor, I think. Not entirely. Well, actually,
D majors were relative minor.
yeah.
So it would be down
minor,
3 half steps.
B
So
minor.
C sharp, C, B.
B. Okay. Oh, wait, would it be B or B flat?
B minor.
Oh, B minor. Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. So yeah, that's another thing you could do. Also, what some people do is you can add overtones to whatever your bass note is. So you kind of got your sub frequency and then harmonics thereafter, just to kind of give it more room. But that still doesn't really fix the sub issue, like the actually hearing the bass kind of issue.
Actually kind of
That's
Yeah.
interesting.
So we just cloned the bass line, copied it an octave up, and then lowered the velocity. I don't think there's anything else that I. Oh, actually, yeah. Okay, kind of a last remark is kind of what we did last week was make all these like crazy cool weird basses with a lot of pitch bending and stuff like that. So that's also like another perfectly valid option, right? Is you just pick your root note, just make some dope as fuck basses, you chop them up, do whatever you want to them, like distort them to all hell, or frequency shift them, or have them do pitch bends and whatnot. And just leave it as that, and sort of chop and kind of create that medley as you go, and that's something that music theory doesn't really help you with, like in the slightest, because it definitely is just an intuition of, okay, here's this type of music that I want to make, and then here's like the type of bass sound and this kind of cool timbre. How am I going to use that timbre to my benefit? So yeah, that's another valid option, and that's one that I use a lot, especially when I'm trying to make like neuro hop, neurofunk kind of music. Is just stick with your root. Maybe add like a couple different notes. Or you could start with your root. Do whatever changes that you want, and be like, oh, okay, I like the sound of this, and then just go back in your chain of events, and just change the note, and then kind of redo all of the effects changes that you want. Of course, the problem with that is, what if you forget what you did, or you delete one step, or you don't remember exactly how you did it. But for the most part, you can just copy paste automation clips and whatnot, and just copy your effects chain from each channel.
Yeah. As Darvish was saying, copy your automation clips. So try not to, when you're doing stuff like that, try not to delete your previous like channel where you were doing all your automation. Yeah.
Exactly. Yeah. So, moral of the story: fuck around until you get something you like.